Hi, everyone. Dr. Elizabeth Bonet here. Dr. Liz, welcome to the Hypnotize Me podcast. Before we jump in, please note that the podcast is not mental health treatment, nor should it replace mental health treatment. If you need psychotherapy or hypnotherapy, please seek treatment from a trained professional. I do hypnosis all over the world, so please feel free to contact me through my website, drlizhypnosis.com, DRLIZ hypnosis.com. Hi everyone, Dr. Liz here. I was trying to wait until it stopped raining to record my intro, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. We are in the summer in South Florida and it rains pretty much every day, usually at pretty regular times, but this morning rain is a little bit of a surprise. Normally it rains every afternoon. So today's interview is really interesting. It is with Bud Megargee, who started out as a skeptic, but found himself having conversations with his own spiritual advisor from beyond this physical life. Bud is a former senior behavioral healthcare executive, a Washington, D.C. healthcare lobbyist, and an independent published award-winning author. This is his fifth book about things communicated to him about what happens in the afterlife, about why we're here, about all kinds of spiritual questions that he has. Now, he does give a bit of background at the beginning. So if you want to jump right into the meat, I suggest fast forwarding to about minute 11, 12, 13, right around there where he really jumps into what does the spirit guide say? You'll hear in the interview that I quite enjoyed his book, because I found it so informative and it's well written and it moves along very well. I found myself reading it at night sometimes, like, ooh, I just want to stay up and read this. A lot of you have heard me say on the podcast before that reading about near-death experiences is a great way to reduce anxiety. I really believe that. And I still do that sometimes in the middle of the night. If I wake up and I'm finding that I'm thinking about things, I will often pick up a book about a near-death experience. I mean, these days it's on my Kindle. I'm not actually picking it up. And I found that this book was a similar type of read. Like, wow, it's so full of information about the purpose of life and what we're doing here and all of this good stuff. Now, during the interview, we talk about an octopus analogy. That's an analogy that's used in the book, just to give you a little bit of context, about different ways that we move through our lives, sort of working our way through lives, almost like the tentacles of an octopus moving between them. So hopefully that will make more sense to you. There's also another author, Michael Newton, who has written a lot about what happens after life, and he accessed that through hypnosis. One of his most well-known books is called Lives Between Lives, which is about this spiritual place that we go to between lives where we do all this stuff. And you'll hear that in the interview as well. I'm a big fan of Michael Newton. In fact, when Bud contacted me about the interview, I said, oh my gosh, I'm a huge fan of Michael Newton. And this sounds very similar. So yes, I'd love to interview you. Now, Bud is not under hypnosis during these conversations with his spiritual advisor. I want to make that clear. He's actually sitting with a medium who is communicating the information from the spiritual advisor. So it's not like Bud is receiving it directly. He's not a medium himself. He's actually very much a skeptic and remains so to some extent. But he's quite enjoyable to talk to. We talked a good bit after the recording stopped as well. And that's pretty unusual. Usually when I interview someone, we do the interview, we talk a little bit, and then we're done. But I found Bud very down to earth. No pun intended. He's very down to earth and very easy to talk to. So let's jump in. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hi, Bud. Welcome to the Hypnotize Me podcast.
Elizabeth, thank you for having me tonight. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I am so excited. I have spent like weeks reading your book. Okay. And Usually I like breeze through a book, but this one I really had to absorb. And this is your latest book, correct? You've written 5
This
or
is the
4?
fifth. It's not a series per se. It seems to have evolved into one, at least for some readers. But yes, this is the fifth in the series.
The 5th in the series. Okay. Well, I am looking forward to like going back and reading previous ones, honestly. I had so much to like contemplate and absorb and yeah, I'm so happy to be here asking some questions too.
Well, I find that most readers don't get lost in the fifth book. I mean, there isn't anything that's hidden in the first 4 that can't be understood in the fifth. But
Good to know.
but I get the same response that some say. I think I need to go back and read some of the other ones to kind of fill in the blanks where there may be some vacant pieces for them. So.
Okay, well, I didn't really feel like there's blanks, but just more like this is fascinating.
Yeah.
So I was very interested in your other conversations or in some of the other books.
It's different, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
It is. It is. And I think I told you when you contacted me that I am a fan of Michael Newton, who
Yes.
does a lot of I mean, it's past life regression, but then he really goes to what he calls the lives between lives, like the
Right.
spiritual place where spirits meet, and then really review their life that they've been in and make contracts for the life they're going to have. Contracts meaning for themselves, for other people in their spiritual cohort, like that type of thing.
In your practice, do you do any life after life?
Well, that's a yes and a no. So I have had clients spontaneously go to past lives, and I have never done one where someone's gone to like the life between life.
Right.
And I'm not really trained in that either. So I don't know if maybe that's why is maybe there's an ease with it that somebody has to have
right.
to allow for that. But it is absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Michael Newton myself, so I'm familiar with what he's done. I'll share with you maybe later because I brought Michael Newton up in one of my evenings, and
You did.
And I'll share with what they said about that. Yes, but
awesome!
I'll save that till later.
Okay, well, I'm going to make a note so we get back to it.
Yeah, please jot that down.
Yeah, I'm going to jot that down. But this is really, this latest book of yours is a different concept than that. I mean, it has some overlap there.
Yes, it does have some overlap, yes.
Just to get us started, can you tell the listeners like how you even discovered Laz, the spiritual guide that talks to you through someone else?
Yeah, well, what may give you a better context is how does somebody who has my background, how does somebody end up sitting in front of an oracle? And the oracle, by the way, the term oracle was a term that the guides gave her. It's not one that she uses. So,
okay,
how do I end up there talking to a spirit, for lack of a better word, mm-hmm. who, in all intents and purposes, seems to know me better than I know myself? Mm-hmm. And that really was the start of the series of books and why I decided to even write them, because if the phrase was, if you were sitting in front of somebody who knew you better than you knew yourself, what questions would you ask, knowing that you would get the most honest answers in return? There was no escape from it, so you couldn't BS somebody as we typically do with some people. And
my husband and I had actually asked each other this question, like if you could ask a spiritual advisor, like any question in the world, like what would you ask them? And we had tossed this back and forth. And then I went to an Abraham Hicks seminar, I'm guessing you're familiar with because she's like an oracle, ended up in the hot seat and able to ask my question, right? But it's like a different question came up, of course, So that, how did you end up there? How did you end up in front of a spiritual advisor? Let's
go back. I'll give you a little background. I come from a deteriorating steel town in southeastern Pennsylvania. That's where I was born. After high school, I went to a Mid-Eastern college, liberal arts college. I graduated with a degree in psychology. When I came back, I continued my studies at Temple University in Philadelphia. I got both my master's and doctorate down there, and health education and its contribution to the psychoeducational process. But I continued my ongoing clinical training at Eastern Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute. And at that time, and I'll kind of date myself a little bit, that's the mid 70s,
Okay.
holistic humanistic psychology was a big movement. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we were studying R.D. Laing and Rollo May and Eric
Mm-hmm.
Fromm, Viktor Frankl, all those guys, and reading all their academic letters, et cetera, et cetera. But it kind of led the groundwork, I think, the seeding of being maybe more unconventional in terms of the way I was approaching things than some of my peers. But I did enter into the whole psychiatric profession. I've been a senior healthcare executive in behavioral health for 40 plus years outside of the clinical training I did initially. And it was all
Mm-hmm.
in the for-profit end of the world, but I was always drawn to the unconventional, not so much new age, but other ways of perceiving things. And let me tell you the genesis of that, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important to understand how somebody ends up again sitting in front of this individual talking to
Yeah.
some spirit. In the 70s and 80s, when we were really developing the program structures, the hospital structures for psychiatric care, everybody was using the branding of mind, body, spirit. You know, we treat the whole
Mm-hmm.
person here, and it kind of fell in line with what we had studied at EPI, the Eastern Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute, etc. But in fairness, and in some ways, much of what they do and still do makes a difference. If we look at in terms of the mind, the therapies that we can now introduce to people as they face the challenges of the traumas they experience in life. You know, the physicality, we've done wonders in terms of the pharmaceutical interventions to take away the pain and structure that people present to themselves. But on the spirit side,
Mm-hmm.
the spirit side really ended up being, will somebody come in to minister for these people, pastor, priest, rabbi, etc., on a
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, you know, and we'll kind of include that as a spiritual piece to our mind, body, spirit. I had just an excellent clinical director when I was operating a hospital in Delaware. And Dr. McGraw really took a look at that and said, you know, we have a problem with this, Bud. Number one, if we're going to offer this, we have to have the capacity to offer it with every possible religious discipline that we get to experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, where are you going to find the Muslim? Where are you going to find the Buddhist? Where, you know, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Second to that, uh, are these people trained to do what they do in this setting? You
Mm-hmm.
know, are they counseling religious people, for lack of a
Mm-hmm.
better term? And we have a medical staff here. Are they credentialed to even walk into the facility? And
Mm-hmm.
the answers kept being no and no and no.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, she said, and I'm having an absolute nightmare every morning at treatment plan, trying to find a way to integrate these people who aren't even here. They just show up on Sunday when none of us are here, and having
Uh-huh.
them integrate into the treatment plan. So that's kind of where it festered for me there.
Uh-huh.
Uh, at the time, my daughter was studying at a Buddhist monastery in Northern Virginia, and she invited me to attend. And they were loaded with, I think, things that I needed at that moment. The whole
Mm-hmm.
alternative medicine thing. They were doing a lot of acupuncture. They were doing a lot in terms of color and smell and
Mm-hmm.
taste and all these things that change the vibration and frequencies of people to kind of better care for them. Breathing, meditation, multiple progressive relaxation kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
all which kind of resonated with me because it actually translated to tangible takeaways that may fit into that little nodule of spirit within the mind body spirit programming thing. So that people who came to psychiatric hospitals may actually kind of walk away with a tool now that they
Mm-hmm.
could use going forward in terms of the treatment of their care. So that was the kind of foundation of everything. Then came the next evolution of this, which
Uh-huh.
was if you're going to what if you're dealing in the area of the spirit of an individual, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about the soul of an individual? Is that what the spirit really is? And as you interviewed religious people, regardless of the discipline, they were all kind of moving down that pathway. What really is a soul?
Uh-huh.
Well, what is that? For me, I was saying,
Yeah.
what is that? I have a friend, two friends actually, that lived reasonably close to the Oracle, and I was visiting with them, and we're having this kind of a discussion. And they said, well, there's this, you know, medium kind of individual that lives up in the mountain. You can't get nearer, but
Uh-huh.
we were kind of kidding. I said, well, I'll call. Let me give you the phone. I'll call. Well, to my surprise, I got to see her that night.
Wow.
And it wasn't so much, I've never had a personal reading by her per se,
Mm-hmm.
but we hit it off because her background was that at a very young age, she's from California originally, at a very young age, apparently had this talent that her mother didn't quite know what to do with. And
Mm-hmm.
the Mahayana Buddhists from a monastery close by came and not so much took her, but trained her how to, I guess, adjust to these talents, or lack of a better term, that she had.
Uh-huh.
So we hit it off because I'm studying at one monastery.
Yeah.
She basically lived at another one, and so from that, this started to evolve. And we would go. We just had conversations, and she would see me periodically because it's quite a distance from where I live. And one day when I'm up there and we're talking about a wide variety of things, this is where it gets weird, Liz. Okay.
Uh-huh. Okay, got it. I'm on the edge here.
Are you sitting down?
I am.
Well, we're sitting again. We're just talking, and she says, "Oh, this is really strange." And I said, "What is that?" And she says, "You have a visitor." And
Oh.
I'm going, "What?" Because I am, when it comes to that kind of thing, and I still am, extraordinarily skeptical.
Uh-huh.
I don't mind having a conversation, but I mean, you start going out on a limb for me, and I'm going to get really skeptical about the whole thing. And
Okay, got it.
I know. And so that was the presentation of all that was such that I left and said, do I want to go back to this thing? And so my curiosity is there, but my skepticism is there along with it. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, so I went and I basically Googled, like the rest of the
Uh-huh.
universe would. I Googled, what, what questions do you ask a spirit if they come? You know, so
Fantastic. Yeah.
I made a whole list.
You made your list.
I made a whole list. I said, okay, I'm going back. I'm going back on my list. And so
Uh-huh.
I asked what what I've come to know now are really, they're not inappropriate. I guess they're typical questions like,
Mm-hmm.
who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a name?
Mm-hmm.
How do I know you? Etc. Etc. But what I learned from all of that initially was that the way you ask them a question has to be really thought out because they actually take the question extraordinarily literally. So if you
Oh.
ask them the question, like one question, it's going to sound a little stupid, Liz, but I asked them, I want to know, where am I in this life?
Oh,
Where am I?
fantastic. That
And
doesn't sound stupid.
and you know what he said to me?
What?
You're sitting on the couch in this room. That's
Oh,
where you. So,
got it.
so
Got it. That's pretty good, right?
so now I'm really taking serious notes. I'm saying, okay, I have to be careful what questions I
Yes.
ask because that dictates the answer you get. So I met with Charlotte and this, I don't know what to call it, Laz, for lack of a better term. As
Mm-hmm.
he said, my name is Laz, and that's changed over time, but basically it's Laz. And I was just curious. I was asking a wide variety of questions that either I was formulating for myself, my friends, my family were formulating. Please take this question up about this or that. And I ended up about a year. I had all of these notes. I taped everything.
You did.
I have
Okay.
shoe boxes full of tape here. And he said to me, the only reason I'm here is because before you came here, you didn't even know I existed.
Oh.
And I said, yeah. And he said, and everybody doesn't know that we exist.
Mm.
And if you wrote about this, Bud, people would
Mm-hmm.
begin to say, maybe they do exist.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I did, Les. I started writing, but I wrote the experience I was having
Uh-huh.
but I wrote it as fiction.
Oh, really?
Because, I mean, how do I walk into my corporate staff meetings,
Right, right.
having said, excuse me, I have some reports on all of you based upon what the spirit told me. So I thought
Uh-huh.
it was kind of a way of protecting, I guess, in a way.
Yeah.
To be honest,
Yeah.
protecting.
I
Uh,
could see that.
and
Felt a
so
little safer.
and so I wrote in that case. I wrote about 70,000 words, and I was
Wow.
very proud of it. I thought it read very well, and went back
Hmm.
up, and he just tore me apart. Not in
Wow.
a bad way, because he never, not negative,
Uh-huh.
but he said to me in the end, "You've just told everybody that I don't exist. By writing as
Oh,
fiction, you just told everybody that I don't exist." And so we went through that whole
got it.
debate about
Uh-huh.
why I wouldn't write it as nonfiction, and why wouldn't you write it, and if you do it, how do you do it? And
Hmm.
so the structure, you've read the book. The structure of the book,
Yeah.
I think, takes on, it's kind of threefold for me in terms of the way I wanted it organized. Uh, you've read Afterlife, so clearly that
Mhm.
book is about the afterlife, right?
Right.
It's about the
Yes.
afterlife.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I love the format of
yeah,
the book,
yeah, and
like
it's
the
but it's
back
also,
and forth, but then your reflection. I
yeah,
really
it's my
appreciated
journey.
your
It's also about
reflection.
my
Yes.
journey here, um,
Yes.
and then it's also about the dynamic of what happens when you're sitting in with somebody like Charlotte,
Yes.
and you have an entity that comes. So you have like a threefold thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I found an ease with that because it was like I had a co-pilot. I
Mm.
wasn't standing
Yeah.
alone with it, and I had a co-pilot. And
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to write it in such a way that, I don't know how you came away from it with, but I wanted people to be able to say, well, if I were sitting there and they were
Mm-hmm.
talking about this particular angle of it, I might have asked this question, or I might have asked that
Mm-hmm.
question.
Mm-hmm.
And when I interact with my readers, that's what they send me most often as well, Bud, why did you let him kind of press you on this the way he did? Why wouldn't you push back on that? Or
Huh.
I would have kind of looked to this particular topic or gone more in detail with this particular thing. Why do you shift gears occasionally in terms of the dialogue where you've got him honing
Uh-huh.
in on one topic and then you kind of give him almost like an out?
Huh.
Because I said, well, that's how that dynamic works. Your mind, you're sitting there, and the exchange is very rapid.
Uh-huh.
And so your thinking process is challenged, to say the least, about
Yeah.
how do you take, what question do you ask next in terms of the depth of where you want to go with all that. So
Yes.
that's the backdrop, Elizabeth, in terms of how that all came about. So if
Got
you
it.
picked up what is book one,
Mm-hmm.
which my editor and I call it dirt, but it's
Okay.
it's
Right.
dirt truth.
Is the plant next and then the
Yeah.
tree and then
Well,
you know.
well, it's dirt was actually a topic one night.
Mm-hmm.
But that book is just the first year and a half of those sequential meetings. Like the other four have a particular focus. Uh,
Oh,
dirt
okay.
dirt is just an accumulation, a compilation
The
of the meetings,
conversations.
but it gives you
Hmm.
an idea of what I have relayed to you initially, which is how do you ask the question so you get an answer that may make
Yeah.
sense to people.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the backdrop.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I did not find myself questioning your questions as I went along. I thought they were actually really good. I'm really enjoying this. And I was just struck by so much, but particularly, I think the last chapter really struck me about awareness and
Yeah,
how
yeah,
the goal is to develop awareness, not just awareness, but like kindness, really self-development,
right,
self-awareness,
right.
acting kind in the world.
Yeah. Love,
Um,
it talks about love, clarity,
love.
and kindness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Love, clarity, and
Yeah.
kindness.
I find I guess for me, and maybe people ask me a lot of questions, and one question is, who is he? Who is
Hmm.
Laz? And
Hmm.
and there's a piece in the chapter early in the book where I try to describe it as best I can.
Yeah.
Uh, but he's kind of like, in a way, your primary guides, which is what he is for me, apparently, are in a way almost a reflection of you, a portional reflection of you. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
sign of a similarity. He describes it as a similarity of energy, not a similarity of continual belief systems.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
The way he perceives the universe is for me. And so I don't know whether you picked this up in the book or not, but most of what he says, analogies, hoaxes, conversations,
Mm-hmm.
etc., are all relative to what I need to do. On occasion, he'll say, some of this applies to everybody, basically, but you know,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
he talked about the need to be more sympathetic. That's me now. He's
Mm-hmm.
talking about you need to be more sympathetic. You need to really work at being less flawed. You perceive
Mm-hmm.
yourself as being more flawed than you are. You have to have.
Okay.
You have
Well,
to
I
have.
wasn't, now that you're saying that, I did not put that difference together because yeah, I was assuming that a lot is applied to everybody,
Yeah,
like the sense of developing a sense of self-worth as part of our journey in order to progress our soul life,
yeah.
right? Our soul progression.
Well, that's intentional. I think in part, not by design, architectural design, but it's intentional in terms of I think the way it rolls out. That you're reading the book that he's talking to me about through your eyes. So you're processing it through your internal system and saying,
Oh,
on
yes.
occasion, saying, yes, that relates to me, but it maybe not exactly the way it's relating to Bud, but it does relate to me because it really is. It
Yes.
really is universal.
Yeah, I mean, believe me, I wanted to highlight the whole book, and that's not very useful to highlight a whole book, right? You might as well not highlight anything if you're going to highlight the whole book. But it's like I could not resist. I'm like, oh my god, yes, 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 But I hear what you're saying. Um, Absolutely. Like I'm reading it through my eyes and
Right,
through my journey here and part of my own spiritual journey.
right,
So developing awareness, developing worth. I mean, that's such a huge focus of my practice even is to help people develop a sense of self-worth.
right,
And that was part of my own spiritual journey as well when I got trained in this one technique where I did go back to a spiritual place myself
right.
and answered the question of my purpose here being to help other people heal. And so, it's part of that contingent, I would say, and
Yeah,
the building the awareness of that. But yeah, absolutely. I see now that you're saying, like, oh, of course, we read it through our own eyes,
right.
right?
Yeah,
Our own
yeah,
journey. And
yeah,
this is some of it specific to your journey.
yeah. Which is odd. I'm not really completely up to speed on this portion of the spirituality spectrum.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Uh, that's the skepticism coming out. That's uh,
All right.
uh,
Well, you probably don't know this, but I was an atheist for 20 years.
okay. Well then,
And so I have plenty of skepticism in
okay,
me. And
okay.
I said,
Then we can relate to that. Um,
yes.
because it was channels. So
Hmm.
what they call voice channel they call it, and I had a really hard time with that. Even though I was sitting there, and it's been 10 years. This whole voyage has been over 10 years. And even though last time I was up there, it's very casual. I'm sitting there. I'll explain to you
Uh-huh.
how that happens. I'm sitting there, and Charlotte and I were always talking about something, one thing or another, and that may go on for 20 or 30 minutes. The sessions go 3, 4 hours actually.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and she'll look over my left shoulder,
Mm.
and she typically at this point she doesn't say anything. I see her eyes. I said, "He's here, isn't he?" And she'll say, "He's saying these things." So
Mm.
I've seen others, not a lot. I'm not
Uh-huh.
because I'm not really up on the channeling thing. I've seen others that kind of get they kind of change, I guess, in the channeling
Hmm.
experience. That's
Yeah.
not Charlotte. She has a conversation with me, not unlike you and I are having now,
Uh-huh.
except that she's saying, "Well, he's saying this, but," and
Yes.
I'll say to her, how do you do that, Charlotte?" She says, "Well," she says, "the only way I know how to explain this is it's like a computer, and I'm trying to give it to you as quickly as I can give it.
Hmm.
But the only change, Bud, is that it may come out with some of my colloquial expressions, et cetera, et cetera.
Got
So
it.
it's not
Okay.
say like exclusively verbatim." The
Hmm.
other thing is that those channeling things that I've heard of, Esther Hicks is one, Paul
Hmm.
Selick is another. they channel like what they call like a universal consciousness. I'm not
Yeah,
saying
collective.
right.
Right.
That's not him. He's
Hmm.
it's singularly him,
It's a
specific
singular,
to me.
specific to you.
And
Okay.
that's what I think is unique, because I just wonder, as you and I are looking in this Zoom call here, I
Yeah.
just wonder, I wonder what your guy's like, or what your, maybe it's a female. I wonder what that's
Yeah.
like, you know. Uh, so that's how that's how the process happens, for good or bad. The dynamic that happens within me in terms of writing it all is so atypical, it's so unconventional in terms of what it
Hmm.
is and who I am, that it's hard for me to kind of amputate my skepticism every night that I go there,
Yeah, I bet. I bet.
to what is really kind of pulling out from that. What is really the message that I'm really being given here? It
Hmm.
kind of, the end of the book kind of comes to that conclusion, that
Yeah.
not unlike the Buddhist teachings I've had. That
Right.
somebody asked me the other day, well, what do you think the one takeaway is? And I said, well, that's a very good question, because we can certainly sift through the detail of all of it.
Hmm.
But in the end, what he's really telling me is I'm so much more than what I think I am,
Yes.
which is a fundamental, basic Buddhist teaching. Just not, just not
Hmm.
kind of spiritualized, if that's a real word, compared to the way he represents it.
Well, it's interesting you put it that way because I see it as a very a common spiritual teaching
Yeah,
as well. Like you are more than you think you are. You're far more than you think you are.
right,
But maybe that's the spiritual teachers I'm drawn to, right? In my universe,
right,
right? That are speaking to me from whatever means, whether that's
right.
through Esther Hicks or someone else, a visit. To me, that's hopeful that we are far more than we think we are, that we are on a journey. It gives me hope in a way that other things don't, actually. I can
Yeah,
get quite mired down in like the hopelessness of this life or this body or the physicality of it. I found it really fascinating to read through his perspective of that.
yeah. I'd be curious about, I mean, I do this with everybody that I Zoom with or pod
Okay.
with. We call this podding, pod
I
with.
don't know. I call it zooming, but we can call it a pod if you like.
Yeah,
That's fine.
because it is, what's the intended purpose behind kind of taking that kind of a voyage, for each of us? Because you're right, it is an individualized voyage that we take. Despite all the words, and I don't know how many words are in that book, but despite all the words, in the end, it comes down to being very simplistic in terms of what his message is. It
Hmm.
was that you've finished the book, so I was struck. I'm actually kind of hypnotized almost by the comment at the end about, but he's showing you a key,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
he does that kind of stuff to me all the time, and that the key really, as you said, it just represents awareness, but that's
Yeah.
what the key is. The key has always been awareness, and he gets into it in the book. So
Uh-huh.
he gets
Yeah.
into the things that shut us down in terms of our awareness, even down to. And I'm not taking shots at anybody's religion. I think
Of
religion's a
course.
good thing,
Yeah.
if you get good things out of it. But that some dogmatic structures actually, shut the door on our awareness. That doesn't want us
Hmm.
to kind of be explosive in terms of what we can or can't or can know.
Right. What we can consider.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's always a matter of awareness to seek what's beyond the obvious.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah. I mean, I loved that. I loved to, it lined up for me because I do a lot of work with weight loss professionally, but also it's a focus of mine still. And just recently, I had thought like part of weight loss is spiritual, like taking care of your body
right?
and taking care of the body you're in and your own soul and spirit, whatever someone wants to call that. And then I read that it's there at the end of the book. Like it's part of the
Yeah,
purpose is
gotta,
to learn how
gotta,
to take care of your kingdom, your body, and I was like, oh my God, yes, thank you, bud. Like
yeah.
unless,
Waited to the very
right?
end. Yeah, uh,
Yeah, it is.
yeah,
And so I found that really fascinating too, of how that was framed by him right there at the end
right.
of some of the lessons that we have as we go along.
What I got most, and maybe it's because of just, maybe it's me and the way I'm wired, I guess. I learn more through stories, and maybe that's why there's just a load of analogies
Mm-hmm.
throughout the book. And
Mm-hmm.
for example, the analogy about bricks. You know,
Yes.
every time that we do something that may not be along the lines of moving us forward, we're basically giving ourselves a brick, and we're carrying that brick around with us.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and if you keep accumulating bricks, they'll turn eventually. If you don't find a way to offload them in some form or fashion,
Uh-huh.
it turns into a wall for you, and you will face that wall. You know,
Yeah.
and that piece, I found it interesting. Some of the, especially when it gets deeply into the afterlife, how some of the way it's not the way he describes it. What he's describing is somewhat universal, and I know that needs a little explanation, Liz, but certainly there is a review. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
his description of a review is in far more detail than what you would learn in terms of any kind of dogmatic presentation or even a near-death presentation. So,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
but you are faced with the accumulation of whatever you've kind of drawn to it. I found it fascinating, and this may be just for your listeners here, that I was always in wonderment about, because I didn't have a near death experience, but I had a patient who had one, and
Mm-hmm.
that's in the book. And I was always fascinated by, what is that tunnel that people talk
Mm-hmm.
about? And I have a little bit of knowledge about the University of Virginia Perceptual Studies Division down there, which does all the near death cataloging
Cool.
experience, etc.
Yes. Okay.
And they do a lot of that as well in terms of what really is that
Uh-huh.
tunnel. Is it a passageway? Is it what? He says it's you.
Yes.
He says it's you. You are you, and that's the other takeaway from me, is that I never considered myself to be an energy. My ego never kind of let me go there.
Oh.
He says
Oh, okay.
you're
Got it.
basically a ball of energy, and
Yes, he
a
does
ball
say
of
that,
energy
right?
has vibration and frequency to it. You're no different than any other energy, the energy in this pen or anything else, uh,
Uh-huh.
and you will vibrate at a certain level based upon what you've done or who you've done
Yeah.
it to, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the spinning. That's what you are.
Yes. Okay. That is fascinating. I think since reading Michael Newton's books, I've thought of myself more as an energy and listening to Esther and Abraham Hicks. But the way that he puts it is really interesting in terms of like being able to vibrate,
Yeah,
right, with things, and that everything has a vibration.
yeah,
And I mean, I think the hippies would tell us this, right? Like if you like, oh, bad vibes here,
yeah,
you're gonna
right.
go ahead and leave the room,
Yeah,
And some people are more intuitive
yeah,
about that than
yeah.
others, right?
He's,
But it
he was relentless on it, wasn't he? Jeez,
Yes, I
he's
saw it
relentless.
as like much more concrete.
Yeah,
And for some reason, when I was reading along, then more of a like concept. It's been sort of
yeah,
a concept in my mind. And it's like, oh no, this is really concrete here. Like he's
yeah,
really talking about the
yeah,
vibration of different
yeah.
things in the world, including me.
I mean, I'm always very curious of people's reaction, because it butts up to everything that we do know, what is kind of out there within our universe about what it may or may not be. The whole idea
Yeah.
behind the senses that you go through and how you move through that
Hmm.
according to chakra. That, by the way, chakra was Charlotte's word, it wasn't his word. It was
Okay.
really her word. He kind of said, she
Yeah.
said, I need to package it so that you understand it, Bud, because he's using words
Mhm.
that I don't really understand. Um,
Oh, okay.
so
Okay. Well, yeah, I really liked the chakra metaphor
yeah,
though. I
it's
did.
kind of
Yeah.
interesting that
It's relatable.
yeah. I have a question for you, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
The first chapter is
Uh-huh.
about the octopus analogy.
Yes.
Okay. When you pick up the book and the first thing you get hit with is this damn octopus analogy,
Yeah. Yeah.
what I find is most people say, geez, you almost lost me with the octopus thing. And,
Oh, no, no. Okay.
and really, the octopus, I mean, he does explain it at the end.
Uh-huh.
But he did that with me for 10 years. He kind of introduces
Uh,
something, and
uh-huh.
then we kind of go around to really examine basically the yin and yang of it. And he
Uh-huh.
comes back to, well, this is what, did you get it now, Bud? He, it's interesting.
Okay.
It's interesting,
Okay.
Elizabeth. He never tells me. he never tells me. In the new book I'm writing, it's
Uh-huh.
absolutely painful because some of the stuff he's talking about. I mean, I'm in there for hours trying to answer a question, but he's not going to tell me. He says you have to find the answer to this yourself. So,
Okay.
so the octopus analogy was really a way for him to illustrate to me. That's the best way, Bud. I can illustrate to you that we have multiple lives, that we live multiple lives.
Yes.
That's what.
Yeah, I
That's the
thought it
purpose.
was by the end, I would
Yeah.
say,
By the end.
by
Yes.
the end, I really appreciated the octopus analogy
Right.
in terms of like moving through these tentacles and even getting stuck in one
Yeah.
and then eventually going more towards the head of the octopus. But not only that, it was this sense of um I don't know why this is coming up at this moment, but the sense of like you can change all of those past lives in a current life,
Yes.
right? Like that energy is related. And I could sort of see that like moving through the octopus for some reason, the legs and
Yeah.
all the lives there, this energy just moving through and changing.
I had a hard time with that.
I bet. I was just recently introduced to this concept. I had interviewed somebody else on the podcast, Dr. Andy Hahn. So I did this session with him.
Right.
And where we go into a past life experience, something like this. But at the end, I say, well, Andy, I'm a little bit practical here. Like, how is this going to change my kids right now?
Right.
And so he said, like, oh, what you did right now changes that past life, which then changes the future. And it was sort of like, for me, I paused for that moment with my brain trying to make all the network connections. But it's like when I ran into it this time, it's like, oh, this is the second time I've heard this. I'm waiting for the third to
Right.
appear soon, but it's like
Right.
this energy, what we're doing now doesn't just change the future for us. It changes the past as well. And it heals the past. That just really fits with some of the hypnosis work I do, honestly, of like, okay, healing. We're doing the healing right now, but we're actually healing the past self that experienced the trauma or was not listened to as a little child or somehow got disconnected from themselves or thought that they weren't worthy, they weren't good enough.
Right. No,
so it's like, yeah, we're healing both of those sides of it.
It amazed me about, again, the complexity of it. That,
Yes.
And I asked them one time, and this is where it gets down to what questions do you ask? What questions do you ask and how do you ask it? How do you frame it? And we were just talking one time, and what's interesting about the experience is what's not in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's one thing to have a regurgitation of what experience I'm having. It's another thing to write the book as though I'm having therapy with, a spiritual, a spiritual being.
Yeah.
But I asked him, I said, I've done this a number of times, exactly what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
He says, oh, more times you know. more. I said, okay, so if that's true, then there's some things that I chose this iteration again to rectify a thing here or there. He says, all of you do that.
Oh, wow.
It's that one part of the book where he says, if you pass, and if the vibration is on a scale of 1 to 10, and you pass and you're a 5, so you spend some time in the senses and the chakra, you're kind of doing your thing. But you get out. You kind of cleanse yourself, as he says, and you get out. And so somehow you've managed to find your way back to the head of the octopus.
Yes.
And I said, well, what do I do now? He says, well, sometimes, he said, what you've done, Bud, is you've looked back and said, I want to go back to that one time when I was an 8. I really want to feel that 8-ness again.
Mm.
He says, and I said, well, I thought first, that's cool. Yeah, you just got, you cancel 5, you go to an 8. He says, oh, no. He says, you can go back to an 8, but anything you do going forward is a 5.
Oh, yeah.
So you cannot carry it forward because you have to work through whatever the karma residue that's there or not.
Yeah.
So I found it interesting, and he really kind of confuses me at the end. He's talking about the influences of all other things have on my progression, right? My soul's progression. And he gives me and you this concept of an octopus analogy.
Right.
And then he says, just imagine for a moment, your spiritual life is like going to a university.
Mm-hmm.
And within a university, but you have multiple colleges.
Right.
So let's take Dr. Bonet, for example. Let's say that her, and this would be a question they would ask you, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
What's the one word that describes this particular voyage you're on? What's the one word? What would be the one word to describe you and who you are?
Compassion.
Not what you do.
No. No. Learning compassion.
Okay. So let's take that. And
it's 2 words.
Yeah.
But,
Let's
that's enough, right? Okay.
Let's capsulize that into basically. I would look at what you do and say, Elizabeth is a classic example of a healer. That's what she is. She really is a healer. Now, she may be healing according to one particular aspect of healing, and that may be her concentration now. Within the university of her soul life, she's in the college of healing. So Elizabeth has to go through that college, and she has to learn everything, absolutely everything about healing. She has to learn to be patient, doctor, observer, administrator, licensure, etc., etc. So all of those lives, whether it's one octopus dropping of tentacles or 10,000, in order for her to graduate from that college, she has to learn everything, the yin and yang of it. I said, well, then what? Well, then you move on to the next college. And maybe in that college, maybe Elizabeth is a teacher.
Right.
So she starts that thing. And he said, and this is in the book, and he says, now just imagine that all these octopuses are all connected by tentacles for the universe. That is the universe of soul existence.
Yeah.
And your journey is to go through each college, to go through the complete university, the yin and yang of both, to graduate. I said, oh, then is that when you join with the creator? No, it all happens all over again. I said, what? That's what we're doing. We're kind of just continuing the process over and over and over again. I had a hard time kind of grabbing on. I thought maybe there'd be some R&R, and I brought that up to us.
It does sound exhausting, but
then I guess the R&R.
It's like I have to do this forever.
And he said,
at some point I get relief.
He says, well, I said, well, I mean, is there a heaven? I mean, I asked the obvious. I asked, not stupid. Yeah. I asked, is there a heaven? If you believe, yes. If you believe there's one, yes. That's your primary memory. So when you first pass, that's what you experience. And I think even in the book, I said, well, how long do I experience that? He says, well, we don't have time here, so it's hard for me to explain to you. You would think it's like, I don't know, a couple of days. We look at it as like a couple of seconds, here. And then I said, well, what happens? He says, well, suppose for a moment that heaven for you is walking on the beach on a great day. It's 75 degrees, breezy. Then that's heaven for you. He says, how long do you think you're going to walk on that beach until you're bored? He says, because your soul is fluid. It's moving. It's always emotion. It's always emotion. So it's always looking for things. It's looking to kind of attach to things. It's looking to grow, et cetera, et cetera. He says, and that's when most souls begin to kind of expand, right? And say, well, what else do I have beside the beach?
Yeah.
And it kind of gets into a little bit.
Yeah.
What I liked that was comforting about Michael Newton was that it was all very organized, right? It's all very positive. It was like joining your groups. You had your buddies. You go to school. You learn. So, I love that fact. It said, "Oh, I can really get into that afterlife."
Yes.
And I wrote in the book.
Totally. Right.
I wrote in the book that having a Michael Newton approach to this is like reading a time-honored novel. And what Lazarus presented to me is like a horror show. In that.
Well, except that your soul is choosing to go off the beach, right?
So diverse.
We're done with the beach. We're gonna do something else now, right? Like that in some sense gives me comfort.
Yeah, he never admonishes any of the dogmatic structures that we have. He never talks about God in the sense that we do. That it's I'm Roman Catholic by birth, so we always had the belief that there was, a guy in beard and a robe and stuff like that. And
Yeah, right.
he
Yeah.
doesn't present it as that. He presents it as
Yeah, when I stopped being atheist, I actually did not believe in a patriarchal God that I grew up with.
right,
The guy in the
right,
beard and all that. It was more of what I like to call my freaky deaky higher powers, like plural.
right, yeah.
So I can get down with that concept for sure. But I did want to ask about Michael Newton. You said you asked him about that.
Oh, Michael Newton.
Right.
We talked about Michael Newton. We talked about, and I said, well, there's an author down here, Michael Newton, and he had this approach. And basically, what I told you, it's very structured and it kind of had organized. I said, how does that relate to where we're going? He says, well, Michael Newton's here. He already knows. He already knows. He already knows what it is.
Okay. But is it like the books? That's the question, right? Great. Yeah, I'm assuming that Michael Newton is there because he's alluding to it.
In a paraphrase, okay? Because I can't remember exactly what he said.
Okay.
But he said when he was hypnotizing his people into life after life, they're not dead. They're hypnotized.
Right.
They're hypnotized.
Right. Yes.
So he talks about that disconnection. So not being dead, your energy doesn't split. You don't experience all those kind of other levels. What you do is you walk the ridges of an afterlife. And when you walk the ridges of an afterlife, mostly what you're getting is your memories or past life kind of stuff. You kind of pick up bits and pieces. He described mediums this way to me. He talked about space-time and time-space. I get lost in physics, chemistry, biology, and in the sciences he gives me. He talked about different talents to mediums. And he says, imagine that there's a pool of water. And if you go into the pool of water, you can access, say, things that you have. You already have. You have it. It's just turned off. He says, some people have the ability to put their toe in the water. He says, now, Bud, maybe that's somebody that you would go to a psychic fair and they go up to a booth and the person is able to kind of give you a couple of things here or there. Some people go in waist deep, and they have much more access to things. And he gave a couple examples. I won't give you names, but he gave a couple examples of people. He says, then you have people like that woman sitting across from you who is submerged in the water. She sees all of it. He says, so that's the diversity of what you get. But mostly, he says, when people walk into mediums picking up stuff.
Yeah.
What he or she is picking up is, he says, you're like a billboard. It's what's on you. It's on your aura. It's stuff that's there. Is there a John in your life? Did you have somebody pass for a heart thing? These are things that are kind of obvious that are on the billboard of your aura. He says to go beyond that for predictability, he says, you really have to be talking to somebody like me, he said.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
But he also said, but I'm not going to predict for you because predicting for you actually puts your soul in reverse. You don't learn. So next psychic you go to. Next psychic you go to say, I say, I wonder what am I
don't want to put my soul in reverse. I really don't.
What am I going to put on my billboard before I walk in here?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That is really interesting. Well, we are coming to the end of our time here, and I could talk to you forever. But
it went quickly, didn't it? Yeah.
It did. But I really wanted to thank you for going on this journey, for writing it, not in fiction form, okay? And for absolutely being on the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Can you tell people how to find you and how to find your books?
My book is everywhere. I mean, you can buy it on Goodreads, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to learn more about the journey itself, you can go to budmegargee.com and we'll kind of give an orientation to all 5 of the books and kind of what they're about. And so I think that's the best way to do it.
Okay, wonderful. And that will be in the show notes as well.
Oh, cool.
So thank you again for this wonderful, enlightening conversation.
It's been fun. Your pleasure, Liz. Your pleasure to be with.
I hope you truly enjoyed today's episode. Remember that you can get free hypnosis downloads over at my website, drlizhypnosis.com, DRLIZ hypnosis.com. I work all over the world doing hypnosis. So if you're interested in working with me, please schedule a free consultation over at my website, and we'll see what your goals are and if I can be of service to you in helping you reach them. Finally, if you liked today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast or tell a friend. That way, more and more people learn about the power of hypnosis. All right, everyone, have a wonderful week. Peace.